Daytona Beach. Rally night. A silenced weapon raised in the dark. And the only person who saw it coming was a 16-year-old boy living behind a dumpster with nothing to his name. Eli had no reason to move. No reason to care. But he did. One decision. 1 second. One bullet that changed everything. What nobody knew yet was that the man holding that gun did not choose that target randomly. Someone inside that building sent him. Someone wearing a patch. Before we continue with the story, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. Drop a comment and tell us where in the world you are watching from. We read every single one. Now let's continue with the story. Daytona Beach does not sleep during rally week. It does not even rest. From the moment the sun drops behind the Atlantic and the last traces of orange dissolve into black, the city transforms into something louder, something rawer, something that operates by a completely different set of rules than the one the rest of Florida pretends to follow. Engines fill every street. Music bleeds out of every open door. And somewhere underneath all of it, underneath the noise and the leather and the cold bottles and the laughter, there is always a current of something else. Something that does not have a name but that certain people can feel the moment they step into it. Tension. A warning. The kind of thing that animals sense before a storm and humans usually ignore until it is too late. Eli Weston had learned to feel it. He was 16 years old, and he had been living behind the Iron Pier bar for 11 days. Before that, it was a parking structure off Seabreeze Boulevard. Before that, it was a bus station bench until security stopped looking the other way. Eli had no phone, no ID, no family he could call, and no shelter that had space for a minor traveling alone with no documentation and no story that anyone wanted to spend time verifying. He had a backpack with 2 changes of clothes, a broken watch he kept anyway because it had belonged to someone he was trying not to think about, and a piece of cardboard he folded exactly the same way every night before he laid it down in the narrow space between the bar's rear dumpster and the cinder block wall that backed up against it. It was not a home, but it was a position. Eli had learned the difference. From that position he could see the entire back lot of the Iron Pier without being seen himself. He knew the kitchen staff schedule. He knew which cook left the side door propped open between 10 and 11. He knew that on rally nights the noise from inside was loud enough to cover almost any sound made outside. He knew these things the way homeless kids learn things, not from curiosity, but from necessity. Survival had made him observant in a way that no classroom ever could. That Saturday night the back lot was fuller than he had ever seen it. Bikes lined every inch of available space, gleaming and massive, each one positioned with the kind of deliberate pride that said the person who owned it cared more about that machine than they cared about most people. Men in leather moved in and out of the rear entrance in groups, laughing, arguing, clapping each other on the back with the easy aggression of people who trusted each other completely or were very good at pretending to. Patches everywhere. The death head, the bottom rocker, the kind of insignia that even a kid who had grown up with nothing had seen enough of to understand what it meant and what it cost to wear it. Eli was not afraid of them. That was the honest truth. He had been afraid of plenty of things in his life, but a crowd of loud men drinking on a warm Florida night was not one of them. He ate the half sandwich he had salvaged from the kitchen bin, drank the last third of a water bottle he had been rationing since afternoon, and watched the lot the way he always watched things. Quietly, without expectation, just taking inventory. That was when he saw Danny. He did not know the name yet. He would learn it later. In that moment Danny was just a young man, early 20s, tall and loose-limbed with the relaxed posture of someone who had never once worried about where he was going to sleep. He was standing near the rear entrance, maybe 15 feet from it, phone pressed to his ear and his back partially turned to the lot, laughing at something, gesturing with his free hand the way people do when the conversation is good and the night is easy and nothing in the world feels like a threat. Eli noticed him the way he noticed everything, filed him away, moved on. Then something shifted. It was not a sound. It was not a movement dramatic enough to catch the eye of anyone who was not already paying the kind of attention Eli paid to everything. It was a quality of stillness. On the far side of the lot, past the row of bikes, past the reach of the single working floodlight mounted above the kitchen door, a figure had appeared at the edge of the shadows near the back fence. Not walking, not approaching, just present. The way a person is present when they have arrived at the exact place they intended to be and are now waiting for the exact moment they have decided upon. Eli went very still. The figure was not dressed like anyone else in that lot. No leather, no patch, dark clothes, dark cap, nothing reflective, nothing that caught light. And the way he stood was wrong. It was not the stillness of someone resting or watching the crowd for entertainment. It was the stillness of someone who had already made a decision and was simply executing it at the speed that the situation required. Eli's eyes dropped to the man's right hand. The weapon was already raised. Everything that happened next happened in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Eli did not think. There was no internal debate, no calculation of risk, no moment where he weighed his life against a stranger's and arrived at a rational conclusion. His body moved before his mind had finished forming a single coherent thought. He was off the cardboard, through the gap in the fence, across the cracked asphalt of the back lot, closing the distance between himself and Danny in a dead sprint that his thin legs had no business completing as fast as they did. He hit Danny low and hard from the left side. The sound that followed was not what most people imagine when they think of a silenced gunshot. It was not silent. It was a sharp mechanical crack, quieter than a standard report but far from invisible, and it came at the exact moment Eli's shoulder connected with Danny's ribs and drove them both sideways and down. Eli felt the impact before he understood it. Not the fall. The other thing. The thing that started in his left shoulder and spread outward like something had been poured into him that was the wrong temperature. He hit the asphalt hard, Danny landing half beside him and half on top of him, and for a moment the whole world narrowed down to the rough texture of the ground against his cheek and the sound of his own breathing, which had changed in a way he could not immediately explain. Danny scrambled upright, looked down, saw the blood. Eli remembers the expression on his face. Not gratitude, not yet, something rawer than that. Something closer to a man who has just been shown a version of reality he was not prepared for and cannot yet process. The back lot erupted. Voices, running footsteps, the rear door of the iron pier slamming open. Men pouring out with the coordinated instinct of people who had spent their lives responding to exactly this kind of moment. Someone was shouting for the shooter. Someone else was already on a phone. 3 men went over the fence at the back of the lot in under 10 seconds. But the figure in the dark clothes was already gone. Eli was on his back on the asphalt, looking up at the Daytona Beach sky. The flood light above the kitchen door was directly in his line of sight, burning white and indifferent. He could hear everything around him, but it was starting to sound like it was coming from a long way off. Someone pressed something hard against his shoulder. He could not feel it anymore, which he understood somewhere in the back of his mind was not a good sign. A face appeared above him. Older man, heavy-set, eyes that had seen enough in their lifetime that they did not widen at blood or chaos but instead went very focused and very flat in a way that was somehow more frightening than panic would have been. The man looked at Eli for a long moment. Then he looked up at someone Eli could not see and said, in a voice that was completely controlled, "Get him inside, and nobody calls anyone until I say so." Eli tried to ask why. The flood light above him blurred, pulsed once, and went dark. Consciousness did not return to Eli Weston all at once. It came back the way a tide comes in, slow and uneven, arriving in pieces that did not immediately connect to each other. Sound first. A low hum that he eventually identified as an air conditioning unit working hard against Florida heat. Then light, warm and amber, coming through his eyelids before he had the coordination to open them. Then smell. Clean linen. Antiseptic. something faintly medicinal that sat at the back of his throat and reminded him of a place he had not been inside in a very long time. He opened his eyes. The ceiling above him was white and uncracked. That was the first thing that registered as wrong. Every ceiling Eli had stared up at in the last 2 years had been damaged in some way. Water-stained, peeling, graffitied, open to the sky. A clean white ceiling was not a ceiling he recognized as belonging to any world he currently inhabited. He turned his head slowly, because instinct told him slowly was the right speed, and took inventory of the room around him. It was not a hospital room. That landed immediately and with weight. No monitors. No call button. No institutional smell underneath the antiseptic. What it was instead was a private room in what appeared to be a mid-range motel that had been cleared of everything decorative and converted into something functional. A rolling table with gauze and medical tape and 2 brown prescription bottles he could not read from where he lay. A chair pushed against the far wall. A window with blackout curtains pulled completely shut so that no light entered and no one could determine from the outside whether the room was occupied. A single lamp on the nightstand, the source of the amber glow, its shade tilted slightly as if someone had knocked it and not bothered to straighten it. And in the chair against the far wall, watching him with the patience of a man who had been watching things for a very long time, was Cole Pruitt. Eli did not know the name yet. What he knew was the vest. Death head patch on the front. Bottom rocker that read Florida. The kind of leather that had been worn long enough to stop being stiff and start being a second skin. Cole Pruitt was somewhere in his mid-40s, broad across the shoulders, with a face that had been rearranged at least once by something harder than a conversation. He was not holding anything. His hands rested on his knees and he was simply looking at Eli the way you look at something you have been asked to make a decision about and have not yet decided. Eli tried to sit up. The shoulder said no. It did not say it politely. It sent a signal so immediate and so total that Eli's entire upper body locked and his breath came out in a sharp involuntary sound that he would have been embarrassed about if the pain had left any room for embarrassment. He lay back. Cole Pruitt did not move from the chair, did not offer help, did not speak. He simply watched. After a moment, when Eli's breathing had steadied, Cole leaned forward and rested his forearms on his knees. He said the bullet had passed clean through. Said a man who had done 2 tours and knew more about field medicine than most licensed physicians had taken care of it within 20 minutes of them bringing Eli inside. Said there was no hospital because a hospital meant paperwork and paperwork meant questions and questions meant a conversation that nobody in that building was prepared to have with law enforcement tonight or any other night. Eli listened to all of this without speaking. Then Cole said something that landed differently than everything else. He said Gus had ordered Eli brought inside. Gus had ordered the medical attention. And Gus would be coming to speak with Eli personally once Eli was capable of holding a conversation without passing out. Eli asked who Gus was. Cole looked at him for a long moment with an expression that was not quite amusement but lived in the same neighborhood. He said Gus was the reason everyone in that building was still breathing. The next several hours passed in a strange suspended quality that Eli could not fully organize into sequence afterward. He drifted in and out. When he was awake, he was aware enough to notice things. A second man checked on him twice without speaking. Food appeared on the rolling table at some point, a takeout container of something hot that he ate slowly and entirely because his body demanded it regardless of the circumstances. Someone had changed his shirt at some point while he was unconscious, and the thought of that, of being that vulnerable and not knowing it, sat in his chest like a stone. He was trying to work out the geometry of the situation. He had no phone. He did not know exactly where he was. He could not see outside. His shoulder would not allow him to move quickly enough to make any kind of exit viable even if he identified one. He was, in every practical sense, contained. The question he kept returning to was whether contained meant protected or whether it meant something else entirely. He was still working on that question when the door opened and Danny walked in. In the light of the room, he looked younger than he had in the parking lot. The looseness was gone from his posture. He stood just inside the door with his hands in his jacket pockets and looked at Eli with an expression that Eli could not immediately categorize. It was not quite guilt. It was not quite gratitude. It occupied a complicated space between the two that suggested Danny was a person who had spent considerable time managing his own emotions into shapes that were easier to carry than the real ones. He said Eli's name. Eli did not ask how he knew it. The backpack had his name written inside the front pocket in permanent marker, a habit from a time when he had things worth labeling. Danny said thank you. Said it once, directly, without dressing it up or pulling it apart. Then he stood there as if he expected Eli to say something in return that would resolve whatever was happening in his expression. Eli said nothing. Danny nodded slowly, as if the silence was an answer he recognized. Then he said that Eli should rest, that he was safe here, and that things would make more sense in the morning. Then he left. Eli stared at the closed door. Safe here. That was the phrase. Not you are safe. Not we will take care of you. Safe here. As opposed to somewhere else. As opposed to if you were anywhere other than this room, in this building, with these people around you. The distinction felt important. Gus arrived an hour later and the entire quality of the room changed the moment he entered it. He was not the largest man Eli had ever seen, but he was the kind of man who occupied space in a way that had nothing to do with physical size. Everything about him was deliberate. The way he closed the door behind him. The way he pulled the chair from against the wall, positioned it precisely, and sat down without rushing any part of the motion. He was somewhere past 60, silver-haired, with eyes that were a pale and steady gray, and that looked at Eli with an attention that felt almost uncomfortable in its completeness. He did not ask how Eli was feeling. He did not offer sympathy or comfort or any of the social scaffolding that people usually construct around difficult conversations. He looked at Eli for a moment and then he said, in a voice that was quiet and even and carried the particular weight of a man who had never once needed to raise it to be heard, that Eli had done something the previous night that most grown men with every reason in the world to act would not have done. He said he did not forget things like that. He said Eli owed him nothing and that he owed Eli something that he intended to make right. Then he shook Eli's hand. Firm and brief and final, the way you shake someone's hand when you are making a promise that you consider binding. He stood, straightened his vest, moved toward the door. He was reaching for the handle when Eli's hand found the phone under the pillow. He did not know where it had come from. He did not know when it had been placed there. He turned it over once and the screen lit up with a single notification. One message. No contact name. No number saved. He opened it. 7 words. The man who shot you works for Gus. Eli looked up. Gus was already gone. 7 words on a screen can dismantle everything. Eli read the message 3 times. Not because he did not understand it the first time. He understood it perfectly the first time. He read it 3 times because understanding something and accepting it are 2 completely different operations, and his mind was performing both simultaneously and arriving at conclusions that made the clean white ceiling above him feel like it was dropping an inch closer with every breath he took. The man who shot you works for Gus. He turned the phone over in his hand. The screen went dark. He turned it back. The message was still there. No sender. No number. Nothing that gave him any way to trace where it had come from or who had placed the phone under his pillow or when they had done it. Someone had been in this room while he slept. Someone had access to this building, access to this room specifically, and had chosen to use that access not to hurt him but to warn him. Which meant at least one person inside whatever this was wanted Eli to know the truth. It also meant at least one person inside whatever this was had decided that truth was dangerous enough to deliver anonymously rather than face to face. Neither of those things was comforting. He sat with it for a long time. The air conditioning hummed. The lamp threw its amber light across the ceiling. Outside the blackout curtains there was nothing. No sound of traffic. No voices. Nothing that helped him calibrate what time it was or how far he was from anywhere that resembled safety. His shoulder throbbed in a slow and patient rhythm that reminded him every few seconds that his body had been through something serious and had not finished processing it. He thought about Cole Pruitt in the chair. The way Cole had watched him. The way Cole had delivered information about the bullet and the field medicine and the reasons for no hospital in the flat measured tone of a man reciting facts he had been authorized to share. Eli had been around enough people managing information to recognize the shape of it. Cole had told him exactly what he was permitted to tell him. Nothing more. He thought about Danny standing inside the door with his hands in his pockets and that complicated expression that was not guilt and not gratitude but something that lived uncomfortably between the two. Thank you said once, cleanly, and then nothing that mattered. Safe here. The specific geography of that phrase. He thought about Gus. The deliberate way he moved. The chair positioned precisely. The handshake that felt like a contract. The voice that had never needed volume to carry authority. He did not forget things like that. Eli owed him nothing. Gus owed Eli something he intended to make right. Every one of those things now sat in a completely different light. Eli made a decision. It was not a dramatic decision. It did not feel heroic or particularly brave. It felt like the same category of decision he had been making for 2 years on the streets. The decision to keep his eyes open, keep his mouth shut, and gather every piece of information available before doing anything that could not be undone. He slid the phone under the mattress, not under the pillow where it had been found, and he lay back and closed his eyes and waited. Cole Pruitt returned in the morning. He brought food this time. 2 containers, coffee in a paper cup, and the unhurried manner of a man who considered breakfast a reasonable place to begin a conversation. He set everything on the rolling table, pulled the chair to its position against the far wall, sat down, and looked at Eli with the same patient assessment he had offered the night before. Eli ate. He did not speak first. Cole watched him eat for a while and then said that Gus wanted Eli moved to the main house by afternoon. Said the motel was a temporary arrangement and that the main house was more appropriate for a longer stay. Said it the way you say something when you are testing whether the person you are talking to will push back or accept, and Eli recognized the test and did not take the bait. He nodded and kept eating. Cole said Eli would have his own room. Said he would be taken care of. Said there was no reason to be nervous. Eli said he was not nervous. Cole looked at him for a moment with something that was almost respect and then looked away. They drove to the main house an hour later. Eli in the back seat of a dark SUV, Cole in the passenger seat, a man Eli had not been introduced to behind the wheel. The drive was 20 minutes through streets that gradually transitioned from commercial to residential to something that sat at the edge of both, larger properties, more space between buildings, the kind of neighborhood where people valued privacy not as a preference but as a requirement. The main house was a single-story ranch property behind a fence that was taller than it needed to be for any decorative purpose. 2 vehicles in the driveway. A man near the front entrance who was standing in the particular way that men stand when standing is their job. Inside, the house was not what Eli expected. It was not sparse or industrial or decorated with the aggressive iconography he associated with what he knew of club culture. It was lived in. Furniture that had been used long enough to conform to the people who used it. A kitchen that smelled of something that had been cooked that morning. Photographs on one wall, not many, but placed with intention. A dog, some kind of shepherd mix, that assessed Eli from across the room with calm amber eyes and then lost interest. He was shown to a room at the end of a hallway. Small, clean, a window that looked out onto a side yard with a wooden fence and a strip of grass that needed cutting. Cole told him to rest, that someone would come for him when Gus was ready to talk. Then he closed the door and Eli heard nothing that sounded like a lock but stood at the door for a long moment anyway, listening before he accepted that the absence of a lock was not the same as freedom. He went to the window instead. The side yard was enclosed. The wooden fence was 6 feet, maybe a little more. Beyond it, he could see the upper story of a neighboring property and a slice of sky that was white and overcast and told him nothing useful. He was calculating anyway. Distance to the fence. Condition of his shoulder. Whether the man near the front entrance was the only exterior security or whether there were others he had not seen. He was doing this automatically, the way he had learned to map every space he occupied. Not because he had decided to run, but because knowing the exits was not the same as using them. Knowing the exits just meant you had options. He was still at the window when the door opened behind him. He turned expecting Cole. It was not Cole. It was a woman he had not seen before. Somewhere in her late 30s, dark hair pulled back, wearing the kind of expression that suggested she had crossed a significant distance of some kind to be standing in this doorway, and was not entirely certain she should be. She looked at Eli with an intensity that was different from the way Cole looked at him or the way Gus looked at him. Those looks had been assessments. This was recognition. Like she had seen his face before in a context that mattered. She stepped inside and closed the door quietly behind her and said his full name. Eli Weston. Not as a question, as a confirmation. He said yes. She said she did not have much time and that he needed to listen carefully. She said the phone under his mattress had come from her. She said the message was not the whole truth. It was the part of the truth she could deliver in 7 words without getting both of them killed. Eli felt the room tighten. He asked her what the rest of it was. She opened her mouth to answer. And then from somewhere in the front of the house came the sound of a door opening and Cole Pruitt's voice calling her name in a tone that was not raised but contained the specific quality of someone who has just discovered something is not where it is supposed to be. She looked at Eli. The recognition in her eyes had shifted into something else now. Something that looked like fear. Not for herself. For him. She leaned close and said 3 words so quietly that Eli had to read them off her lips as much as hear them. Then she straightened up, turned around, and opened the door just as Cole's footsteps reached the hallway. Eli stood in the center of the room and stared at the space where she had just been standing. 3 words. And every assumption he had made about that night in the parking lot, about the shooter, about the target, about who had been in danger and who had put them there, collapsed entirely. Eli stood in the center of that small room at the end of the hallway and let them settle into him the way cold water settles into cracked ground. Slow. Total. Irreversible. He did not move for a long time after the woman left. He could hear Cole's voice in the hallway, measured and controlled, asking her something in a tone that suggested the question had a correct answer, and he was waiting to hear it. He could hear her responding, her voice lighter, easier, performing a version of calm that Eli now understood was a survival skill she had been practicing for a very long time. He heard footsteps move away from the door. He exhaled. The 3 words she had left him with were these. Danny set it up. Not the shooter. Not some rival club moving on the Hells Angels during rally week. Not a random act of violence in a city that manufactured them on schedule. Danny. The young man with the loose posture and the complicated expression. The one who had stood inside the door of that motel room with his hands in his jacket pockets and said thank you once, cleanly, without pulling it apart. The one who had told Eli he was safe here and then left before the word safe had finished landing. Gus's son had arranged the shooting. Eli sat down on the edge of the bed and pressed his good hand against his knee to stop it from moving. He was doing the thing his mind always did when it received information that required restructuring. He was going back through everything, every moment, every detail and reassigning meaning. The figure in the dark clothes at the edge of the parking lot. The suppressed weapon already raised. The specific positioning of Danny near the rear entrance, back partially turned, phone to his ear, laughing. Exposed. Visible. Perfectly framed. Not careless. Staged. Danny had not been the target. Danny had been the performance. Someone standing in that lot watching through a scope was supposed to see exactly what Eli had seen. A clean shot. An easy mark. And then the shot was supposed to land, and Danny was supposed to fall, and whatever came after that was the point. The inheritance. The power. The thing that passed from Gus to whoever Gus trusted most in the moment of his deepest grief. Except a 16-year-old boy living behind a dumpster had not read the script. Eli pressed the heel of his hand against his eyes. His shoulder was burning. The pain medication from the night before had worn off completely, and he had not asked for more because asking for anything in this house felt like debt. Everything in this house felt like debt. The food, the room, the clean ceiling. The man near the front entrance who was standing there for reasons that had just rearranged themselves entirely in Eli's understanding. He was not here because Gus was grateful. He was here because Eli was a problem that had not been resolved yet. He stood up, went to the window. The side yard looked exactly as it had an hour ago. Fence. Grass that needed cutting. Slice of white sky. He was not looking at it as an exit anymore. He was looking at it as a clock. Whatever window existed between now and the moment someone in this house made a decision about what to do with a homeless kid who had seen too much was not a window he could measure in days. Cole Pruitt's voice in the hallway had carried something underneath its control that Eli recognized now that he was listening for it. Urgency. The specific urgency of a situation developing faster than expected. The woman knew something. She had delivered 7 words through a phone under a pillow, and then crossed whatever distance she had crossed to stand in his doorway and give him 3 more. She had done both of those things at personal risk. She had done them for a reason. Eli did not know her name. He did not know her position in this house or her relationship to any of the people in it. What he knew was the look in her eyes when Cole's footsteps reached the hallway. That had not been the fear of someone caught doing something minor. That had been the fear of someone who understood exactly what discovery cost in a place like this. He needed to find her again. The opportunity came 2 hours later in a way he had not engineered and could not have predicted. Cole appeared in the doorway and told Eli that Gus wanted to see him. Led him down the hallway and through the main living area and out through a rear sliding door into a covered patio that looked out over a backyard considerably larger than the side yard. Gus was seated at a wooden table with 2 chairs, a coffee cup in front of him, looking out at the yard with the expression of a man conducting a private conversation with something no one else could see. Cole left them. Gus did not speak immediately. He let Eli sit. Let the silence do what silence does in the presence of someone comfortable with it. A ceiling fan turned slowly overhead, pushing warm air in lazy circles. Somewhere beyond the back fence a dog was barking at something with the rhythmic persistence of an animal that had committed to its position. Then Gus said that Eli looked better. Eli said he felt better. Gus nodded and looked at his coffee cup and said that he had been making some inquiries. Said he wanted to understand who Eli was and where he had come from and whether there was anyone who needed to be notified about what had happened. Said it with the genuine concern of a man who had decided to take responsibility for someone else's well-being. Eli listened to every word and heard everything underneath them. Who are you? What do you know? Who have you told? He said there was no one to notify. Said he had been on his own for 2 years and that no one was looking for him. Watched Gus receive that information and file it somewhere behind those pale gray eyes without any change in expression. The absence of a reaction was its own kind of answer. Gus said that Eli was welcome to stay as long as he needed. Said the club took care of people who took care of the club. Said it with the quiet certainty of a man who believed what he was saying completely or had said it enough times that the difference no longer mattered. Eli said he appreciated that. He spent the rest of the afternoon mapping the house. He did it carefully and without obvious intent, moving through available spaces with the unhurried manner of someone still recovering, which was not entirely performance because his shoulder was genuinely making its presence known. He counted the people he could account for. Cole, the driver from the morning, the man near the front entrance who had been replaced in the afternoon by a different man in the same position. 2 others he identified by voice from rooms he did not enter. 6 people that he knew of, possibly more he had not seen. He found the woman in the kitchen at the edge of the evening, when the light outside had gone the color of old copper and the house had settled into the lower register of noise that precedes night. She was at the counter with her back to the doorway, and she heard him come in and went still in the way that people go still when they are hoping the thing behind them is not what they think it is. She turned when he said nothing. He looked at her and kept his voice below the threshold of the hallway. He asked her one question. He asked her why Danny would arrange his own near death. She looked at him for a long moment, and something moved through her expression that was too complex to name. Then she said it was not a near death. She said Danny was never supposed to be standing near the rear entrance that night. She said Danny had been placed there, positioned, by someone who needed Danny to believe he had almost died so that Danny would do what grieving almost dead sons do, which was go to their fathers and swear loyalty and accept whatever was offered in the name of protection. Eli went cold. He said, "Then who was the shooter actually working for?" She opened her mouth. The kitchen light went out. Every light in the house went out. And in the sudden complete darkness, from somewhere very close, came the sound of breaking glass, and then a voice Eli had never heard before, low and deliberate, saying a single name. Not Gus. Not Danny. Not Cole. Eli. Darkness does not frighten everyone the same way. For some people it is disorienting, a sudden theft of reference points that sends the mind into a brief, controlled panic before the eyes adjust and reason reasserts itself. For Eli Weston, darkness was something he had lived inside for 2 years. He knew its texture. He knew how to move through it without betraying his position. He knew that the first 3 seconds after a light goes out are the most dangerous because that is when people react instead of think. Eli did not react. He dropped low and moved left in one continuous motion, putting the kitchen island between himself and the direction the voice had come from. His shoulder screamed at the movement and he absorbed it without sound. He could hear the woman somewhere to his right, her breathing audible now in the absence of every other sound the house had been making. The refrigerator had stopped humming. The ceiling fan had stopped turning. Whatever had killed the lights had killed the power entirely, which meant this was not a breaker. This was deliberate. Someone outside this house had made a decision and was now executing it. And the only question that mattered in the next 30 seconds was whether the people inside this house were the target or the obstacle. If you have been with us this far, then you already know this story is not like anything else out there. Hit that like button, subscribe so you never miss a chapter, and tell us in the comments where in the world you are watching from. Now let us finish this. In the hallway, voices. Cole first, sharp and operational, issuing instructions to people Eli could not see. Then movement, multiple sets of footsteps. The particular controlled urgency of men who had rehearsed for exactly this category of situation without knowing the specific details. A flashlight beam cut across the living area. Then another. Someone was at the front of the house. Someone else was moving toward the rear. The woman reached across the darkness and found Eli's arm. She pulled him toward the far end of the kitchen, away from the hallway, toward a door Eli had clocked during his afternoon mapping but had not been able to open because it had been locked from the other side. She had a key. He heard it in the lock before he saw anything, and then the door swung inward and cool night air came through and she was moving and he was following because the alternative was staying in a house where someone had just announced his name in the dark, and that was not an alternative at all. They came out into a narrow side passage between the house and the fence. Above them the sky was dark and overcast, the same white that had turned to pewter as evening came in. She moved without hesitation, which told Eli she had walked this path before. Maybe not tonight, maybe not recently, but she had planned it. People who move through darkness with that kind of certainty have been preparing for the moment longer than the moment has been happening. At the end of the passage the fence had a gate. Padlocked. She produced a second key, and Eli understood then that whatever she was, whatever her position in that house had been, she had been preparing to leave it for a long time. The gate opened onto a residential street that was quiet and poorly lit, and exactly the kind of street that does not notice two people moving quickly along its edge. They were 2 blocks away when the sound reached them. Not gunfire. Not the kind of explosion that movies use. A single sharp report from inside or close to the property, followed by shouting, followed by the particular quality of silence that falls after something irreversible has happened. Eli stopped walking. The woman stopped beside him. They stood on the dark sidewalk and listened to the silence expand. He asked her what her name was. She said it was Nora. He asked her how long she had been inside that house. She said 4 years. Said she had come in through Danny, that Danny had been different once, or had done a convincing enough impression of different that she had not seen the shape of what he actually was until she was too deep inside the structure of that life to leave cleanly. Said she had been gathering information for 18 months. Said the phone under his pillow had been a risk she had calculated down to the last detail and had still almost not taken. Eli asked her who the shooter had actually been working for. Nora was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that is not hesitation but preparation. Then she said the shooter had been contracted through a man 2 chapters removed from the Florida chapter. A man who had been building a case against Gus for 3 years. Not a rival. Not law enforcement. Someone inside the national structure who wanted Gus removed and had found in Danny a willing instrument. A son with ambition that had curdled somewhere along the way into something much darker. The plan had been elegant in its brutality. Danny positioned near the entrance. The shot fired and missed by design. Danny running to his father in the aftermath, shaken and grateful and ready to be molded. Gus, moved by his son's near death, dropping his guard in the one direction he had never thought to protect. Except the shot had not missed by design. Eli thought about that for a moment. He said, "The shooter went off script." Nora nodded. Said the shooter had been given a window and had made a decision inside that window that nobody had authorized. Whether it was a conscience or a calculation she did not know. What she knew was that the bullet had been real and it had found the only person in that parking lot who had moved toward the danger instead of away from it. Eli looked down at the sidewalk for a long moment. He was 16 years old. He had no phone, no ID, no family, no fixed address. He had a backpack with 2 changes of clothes and a broken watch and a bullet wound in his left shoulder that was going to require actual medical attention from an actual licensed physician before the week was out. He had no logical claim to any of what had happened to him over the past several days. He had simply been in an alley at the wrong time with the right instincts, and the world had decided that was enough to pull him into the center of something that had been building for years before he ever arrived in Daytona Beach. But he was alive, and Cole Pruitt was not. That was what Nora told him next, quietly, while they walked. She had received a message on a second phone she had kept hidden in the lining of her jacket. One line. Cole had been found in the front hallway. The single sharp report they had heard from 2 blocks away had not been aimed at an intruder. It had been aimed at the one man in that house who had started asking the wrong questions in the wrong direction and had gotten close enough to an answer that someone could not afford to let him finish the sentence. Eli stopped walking again. He thought about Cole in the chair against the far wall. The patience of him. The flat assessment. The moment on the patio when Gus had been asking questions that were not really questions and Cole had been standing just inside the rear door with an expression that Eli had not been able to read at the time but could read now. Cole had known something. Not everything, but enough. And whatever Cole had known had cost him everything. Nora said they needed to keep moving. Eli said he knew. They walked for another hour through streets that gradually widened and brightened until they reached a gas station on a commercial strip that was still open and still lit and populated by the ordinary indifferent world that had no idea what had been happening 3 miles behind them. Nora used a phone to call someone Eli did not ask about. They waited inside near the coffee station and Eli drank something hot that tasted like nothing in particular and felt like everything necessary. A car arrived 20 minutes later. A man Eli had never seen, driving without urgency, who looked at Nora and nodded and looked at Eli and said nothing. They got in. Eli looked out the window as the gas station fell away behind them. Daytona Beach moved past in strips of light and noise, the rally still running somewhere in the distance, engines and music and the city doing what it always did, manufacturing its loud, indifferent Saturday nights without any awareness of what had happened inside them. He thought about Danny. About Gus sitting on that covered patio with his coffee and his pale gray eyes and his careful questions, not yet knowing that the danger he was calculating for had been sitting across the table from him at breakfast for 20 years wearing his own last name. He thought about Cole. He pressed his forehead against the cool glass of the car window and closed his eyes. He was 16 years old and he had walked into the middle of a war that had nothing to do with him and had come out the other side with a bullet scar, no shoes that fit properly, and the knowledge that some truths do not set you free. Some truths just show you exactly how small the safe spaces in the world actually are and how quickly they can go dark. The car moved through the Florida night. And Eli Weston, who had learned long ago that survival was not the same as living, stared at the road ahead and tried, for the first time in a very long time, to imagine what came next.